The Melungeon people, the Appalachians, a mystery to this day. So many unanswered questions. And a lot of you ask, what is Melungeon? What's it stand for? Well, it's a French word for mixed that they give this group of people years ago. And there's so many families that can trace their roots back to this Melungeon bloodline through DNA, which they're doing today. And we know who they are, and we know where they come from all this DNA testing they've done over the last 10 years. And a lot of people can trace their roots back to these people. Now, the Melungeon people are not the only mixed ethnic groups in America. Here's a map of some of the other groups in Eastern America. So many little groups. But the Melungeons hold such mystery of how they got here in these mountains. So much mystery. And here's a sample of just some of the DNA testing when broke down where they come from around the world. And they've been doing this for years now. And some of the DNA testing, this is just some of the places where some of the people bloodline can be traced back to around the world. But we know who they are, where they come from. But my question is, how did they get here? Now, they've done a lot of studies on this group of people, our mountain people, the Melungeons, they call them, and they still questions to be answered. But they're getting closer and closer to finding all the answers through all this DNA testing that they've done over the last 10 years or so. And these are just everyday, hard-working families of mixed blood of different races. Now, a lot of universities, colleges, studies have been done, and people have dedicated a lot of their time into decoding and figuring out all the mysteries of this people that's been in these mountains. The first human to ever lay eyes on this Tennessee Valley were the Native Americans thousands of years ago. And they lived here undisturbed in this wilderness of North America, hunting and raising families of their own culture. But the first white European documented person in these mountains is a guy called Hernando de Soto in the year 1540, exploring this country for gold, riches, and plunder, just like they did South America years before. And he had an expedition here come out of Florida from 1539 to 1543, looking for gold and whatever he could conquer and conquest of stealing, plundering, and claiming land for Spain. He was a cruel leader, just like all these Spanish conquistadors back in them days. He come up here on this expedition with 800 men and 200 slaves, and taking more slaves on the way. This was wild country. And here's his expedition on the northern route. He swung through the mountains out of South Carolina to North Carolina and come down the French Broad River into East Tennessee. And they made rafts and eased down the river till they got to what nowadays is called Douglas Lake. They was an island here, Zimmerman Island. They was an Indian village here, a big Indian village. But it's all under the lake now. Well, he stayed here. His men was wore out going through them mountains. This is 1540, and he'd done been a year or more into his expedition. And they stayed here for about 3 weeks, they said. In his journal, he kept a daily journal, his people did. And they explored even as far north as the Holston River while they was resting. But a lot of his men was tired of this, and they deserted with the Native American women to the north into these mountains. They said there was dozens of them. So they just fled off into the mountains. They had had enough of them. Well, he had all of his people from Spain and different parts of the world with him, and his slave. So this went up into this country, and it's so coincidental that it's the same place that the Melungeons got started. Here's the map. But he left there. In another year, he'd worked his way down the Tennessee River, and his expedition was over. They took care of him. But the next people in here that wasn't documented was probably the Lone Hunters, the French, the British, just people exploring the mountains and hunting, fur trading. But the first documented person after that exploring this country for the British, before it became a nation, was Thomas Walker, some 200 years later. And he named the mountain, the rivers, and stuff. And even in his journal, I looked, he has no mention of Melungeons or running into any such people in his book, his journal. And then Daniel Boone come through here blazing a trail in 1775, 76. But they noticed there was people already in these mountains. Little settlements and little villages, farms. This is Newman Ridge in East Tennessee, not far from the old Wilderness Road. This is in Hancock County, down into Claiborne County, Tennessee. This is the ridge. Here's the map of it. You can see it here. This is supposed to be where they really got started at and kind of migrated out from there years ago. Now they said there's other theories of how they got here. Shipwrecks off the East Coast and they worked their way inland. That's one theory they claim that I don't buy. And later, slaves, freed slaves and escaped slaves escaped inland into these mountains and intermixed with the Native American. But nowadays, intermarriages is nothing. It's a commonplace and nobody thinks much of it. But back in them days, we're talking 1700s, 16, 17, 1800s, that was taboo. And them people was shunned upon. So they had to flee off to theirself into the mountains. But you can't stop love. You never could. That's the way history is. That's the way life is. And these old people, they just hid off in these mountains, started their own life on a little piece of land, trying to raise a family, trying to survive and get by, and stay away from the mainstream, because they was shunned. And they lived off the land like all these other homesteaders and settlers, growed their own, worked their own land, and harvest and put up their own bounty. That's just how mountain people is in these mountains. And they've done a lot of hunting in these mountains. put game, food like that on the table, raised their family. And they just tried to have a life, raising their kids. They didn't have much of nothing at all, but they had their family and they had each other. It was a hard life, but it was a hard life for all of them in these mountains back in them days. But they made it. They even had their own schools. And churches. And there's all kinds of diversity in this group of people. Afro-Americans, Native Americans, European, Spanish, all kinds. But as generations went by, generation after generation, they began to expand out. Now they're all across the country. And a lot of them don't even know where they come from. Now I can remember my dad, I worked in the mines, and my dad worked with a guy in the mines that we'd rabbit hunt every once in a while with, in Hoops Creek, Claiborne County, just on the edge of the Claiborne County, Hancock County line. And they were black people and Melungeons mixed in. And they were the nicest people I ever met. But I can't remember the name. Now there's a lot of well-known people that's out there that can trace their blood back to these Melungeons, like Bill Monroe, a great bluegrass musician. And of course Elvis Presley, everybody knows him. He could trace his bloodline back to the Melungeons. And a beautiful actress, Ava Gardner. They can all trace their bloodline back to these mountains. But the most famous of all, I think, is Abraham Lincoln. He come from humble beginnings, and he can trace his great people back to these mountains of East Tennessee, Southeast Virginia. Now you can get all kinds of books on this subject. It's unlimited. These are just a few, book after book, and they go more in depth than I ever could touch on this subject. And just here's some of the names that's associated with the Melungeon culture, last name. So much history here that you can only scratch the surface. And these great mountain people, they'll forever be part of these mountains, no matter what race they are. And they'll be remembered like the rest of our people. So I hope you enjoy this little video of our mountain people, Appalachia people. So God bless, take care, and I'll see you next time.